Well, the film was never intended to be a talking head movie, and the goal was always to have as few people as possible in the film. I wanted it to be as intimate as I could get it, and so the idea was only to have primal relationships: mother, father, sister, wife, first love, and best friend. And my feeling was that Chris Novoselic could represent Kurt's interest better than anyone as it relates to Nirvana, as he's the only person who was there from the beginning to the end.
Mm-hmm. So it was your choice. It wasn't that he declined to be interviewed for the film.
No, he eventually sat for an interview. After I made when I screened the film early on, one of my friends said, it may be distracting if Dave isn't in the film. And if you don't put him in the film, you're never going to get through a Q&A without having to answer this question.
Right.
So we went back and pushed harder to get an interview, and then eventually Dave was free, but it was after I'd finished cutting the film, and I just couldn't find an organic way to insert him. There was nothing that I felt was left unsaid about Kurt that needed to be addressed.
Yeah. So I think this project,
and I wasn't putting in. The thing is, I wasn't going to put him in just to put him in, because that feels kind of crass. So with all those people that were interviewed, those would be the same 5, 6 people who would have been at Kurt's side had he been, a janitor in Aberdeen, Washington his whole life.
Yeah.
Those are the closest people to him in his life. And as you can see, there's a sense that I think, nobody's really recovered, and I found all the interviews to be quite haunting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As one can expect, given the circumstances.
Right. Let's go back to the beginning of this project. How did it come about that you made the project? Who approached you?
Yeah. I was approached by Courtney Love in 2007. She was a big fan of the Kid Stays in the Picture, and particularly liked the way that I animated Bob's ephemera and photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And she came to me and said, the world knows Kurt as lead singer of Nirvana, but he was really an artist, and I have a storage room full of his art that I think could serve as a basis for a film. And so thus began a 4 to 5 year journey to untangle all of the rights related to putting together a Kurt Cobain film, because it's not as if the family controls all the rights. There are several parties involved. Mm-hmm. And by the time we had sort of arrived at the place where we were ready to start making the film, Frances Bean had come of age. When I first got involved, she was early teens, maybe 13 or 14, and by the time we were ready to start making the film, she was, I think, 19 or 20 or something like that. And so I went, in the intervening years, it was clear that even though Courtney came to me with the idea for the project, she couldn't have any sort of official, or she couldn't have any creative role in the film. Because she's a subject in the film, and because I felt that primarily because she's a subject in the film.
Right.
And I was coming off an experience I'd made with the Rolling Stones, and I was animate that I needed the final cut for the film. The one person I was open to discussions with was Frances. When I met Frances the first time, she shook my hand, and as we were shaking my hand, said, we just met, and I know you more than I know my father. And what she meant by that was she had no active memory of Kurt. He died when she was 20 months old.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment that I realized we had an opportunity with this film to do something much more than create a film for the fans or the public, but we had an opportunity to make a film that would help bridge a gap between a father and a daughter. And and it was Francis who, as we sat down to talk, said to me, whatever you do, the best way we can pay tribute to Kurt is to create an honest film.
Right.
So don't shy away from anything. Keep it honest and keep it real. I don't know. I mean, as the filmmaker, listen, it's as an audience member, of course, the film is there for you if you want to be critical of him or not. I think as a filmmaker, I don't recall, there were things that Kurt did that were upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
But I arrived at those moments with a deep understanding of how Kurt had arrived there. And so I never saw things in black and white. I tried, I never felt myself sitting in judgment of Kurt. As I said, I was disappointed. There are certain things that are obviously extremely upsetting and disappointing, but, I really tried not to point a finger or blame anyone in particular. It just... But at the same time, I think that that it was it's been a cathartic experience for Francis and I think for all involved. I just saw a tweet Monday night from Chris Novoselic that really affected me. It was really impactful. Because, when Chris, I'm going to try to pull it up while we're talking, but when Chris saw the film for the first time, like Wendy, he was, I think, concerned about some of the images of Kurt on heroin, which was something that, I had long conversations with the family about.
Yeah.
The other night, after the film aired, the other night after the broadcast, he wrote something about how the film has sort of helped him heal, which was really touching, and I think that it was I think it was really courageous of Francis, because I'd agree with you. Most times you hear the word authorized, you think it means we interpret that as watered down.
Right.
Like as you said, the sanitized version. And I think it was incredibly courageous and bold of her. Because the reason people tend to water things down is they view these sort of assets, these estates as assets, and they need to protect them, and they for monetary reasons. And there was never any concern or discussion with Francis about if the only conversation was about being honest, and I think it was a really courageous move on her part, and I think it's indication that the estate is in very good hands.
Yeah. And
I was casual. I like the music. I'm the same age as Kurt and had similar upbringing, and culturally was part of the underground in the 80s. And so when Nirvana broke, it was a pretty triumphant moment, I think, for all of us.
mm-hmm.
But, in the years leading up to the film, I wasn't, I didn't listen to the music all that much. What intrigued me was the idea of doing a film about an artist from the inside out rather than the outside in. And with Kurt Cobain, I discovered a subject who expressed himself across so many different forms of media, both orally and visually, and in many respects was kind of creating an oral and visual autobiography of his life.
Right.
And the task came to me to sort of curate it, and but I feel that Kurt's story really lends itself to cinema more than any other media, because of its extensive use of sound design and sound collage, as well as the kinetic nature of his art. Yeah,
Okay.
I tend to put my faith in primary sources much more than I do in testimony.
Yeah.
I didn't really feel a need to talk to that many outside sources because I was given access to Kurt's, sort of own experiences of life as depicted through his art, which I think is the most honest way to sort of arrive at Kurt. As everyone I interviewed mentioned, unsolicited by the way, Kurt would often speak out of both sides of his mouth. I mean, this wasn't a criticism. This was just a statement made over and over and over again by his mother, father, sister, Chris, Courtney, and Tracy. It was just that was part of Kurt's vernacular, and so he's a very mercurial figure to try to make a film on if you're basing it off other people's testimony.
Right.
But Kurt was such a raw artist that you can always sort of unearth an emotional truth within his art. And I think that's why we're talking about him. That I think that's the reason he resonates with people. And so it became clear that the best way to tell a story is let him tell it, not to an interviewer, but in the best way he could, which is through his expression of his own experience in life. It's not, if it was a film about Nirvana, that would be a grave oversight. But, in a film about Kurt, I mean, once again, it's about his interior journey through life. And to sit there and to stumble around those cliches felt like a waste of time. And I think that when you make these movies, everything needs, you can't get everything in there. So you try to lock onto a through line of action.
Yeah.
And this film was very interior. So that kind of dictated where we put our focus and attention. I find a lot of that sort of stuff, they're I strongly believe that if you're writing a book on a subject like Kurt Cobain, a book like Charlie Cross's book, it's exhaustive and it's filled with dates and facts, and I think it serves a very valuable function. And I wouldn't attempt to try to do what Charlie was able to do in a book in a 2-hour film. Mm-hmm. So I strongly believe that with a movie, you need to exploit the medium you're with, and that means creating an experience and seeking out emotional truths. As that really lend themselves to a cinematic experience. And so that through all my work, that's the one question I go into the project with. It's not so much that I'm trying to unearth new information. If that happens, terrific. But I'm more interested in creating a unique cinematic experience.
Yeah.
There's in the movie I did about the Rolling Stones, Crossfire Hurricane, or in The Kid Stays in the Picture, or even in Montage, to a lesser extent, Montage of Heck. But to take the Stones film, I don't believe we learn anything new per se about the Stones in terms of facts and dates. But we experience the band in a manner that hopefully we haven't experienced before on film. And I think that's a valuable asset, and is really the essence of what I'm striving for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there is even though On the Ropes is more associated with direct cinema and then The Kid Stays in the Picture, which I think is very much a part of the new face of documentary, or that expanded in the 2000s. They share a common link, which is they were both constructed to they were both constructed in a manner that feels like fiction, in terms of using the one of the things I was always interested in was taking all of the things I loved about fiction, score and sound design and structure, and applying them to nonfiction. With the kid stage in the picture, I was looking to do something that was a little more irreverent and cheeky than On the Ropes. And the style of that film was arrived at for several reasons. One, the film was financed by Universal Pictures, and at that time, very few documentaries were financed by a studio. So there was the initial feeling that we have to do something sort of larger than life, to appeal to get people into a cinema. Yeah. More importantly, though, Bob's. When I set out to do the kid stage in the picture, I started by writing a list of adjectives to describe Bob, and it was funny, romantic, kitschy, seductive, sensual, whatever they were. And that then became the style of the film. So the idea was not to make a film that's so much about Bob, but a film that actually is Bob. That's the personification of him. Because the film was narrated exclusively by Bob, I felt the need as a filmmaker to comment upon the subjectivity of the experience. So at the beginning of the film, there's a card that comes up that says three sides. There are three sides of the story: your side, my side, and truth. The 3D photographic animation, the After Effects work, was done for a couple of reasons. One, because Bob is a master, Bob is a great seducer. That's he's incredibly seductive. I wanted the imagery to be equally as seductive. And at the same time, by distorting the photographs, we were able, I believe, to comment on the subjective nature of the narrator. So that images are not presented merely as fact, but as much more ethereal and dreamlike. I think it served. It was a proper form of a proper marriage of form and content. Well, I think what happened we just, with the kid stage in the picture, the timing, everything was heading in that direction in a sense. What happened in essence at the early part of the last decade was digital technologies became available to documentary filmmakers. Rather than having to pan and scan a photograph on an animation stand, we could now approach. I like to approach each photograph as if I'm a director walking onto a sound stage, and the set has already been built, but the lights haven't been placed and the camera hasn't been placed. And you could either turn that set into a haunted house or into Morning in America, depending on how you light it and shade it. And with digital technologies, we're now able to approach photographs or two-dimensional art with that same sort of aesthetic. And I think it's not just the kid. It was basically just the accessibility of all of this technology. And with films like Chicago 10 and Waltz with Bashir, they weren't the first animated documentaries. Emily Hubley, Chris Marker worked in animation, and Emily Hubley worked in animation. It had been done prior, but I think what we started to see in the last decade was the economics change, where it became more financially viable for films to incorporate animations and other filmic tools to enhance the storytelling. One of the great things about documentary, and one of the most liberating things about nonfiction as a genre, is there are no rules. That in fiction, there's been, since The Great Train Robbery, which is, considered by many to be the first sort of dramatic fiction film, to current cinema, there's been relatively little advancement in the grammar or aesthetics or language of dominant cinema. There's certain limitations that I think people are sort of bound by. But with nonfiction, it's very much like the Wild West. I think anything goes, and I think what we're seeing now is, and listen, I think reality television certainly helped push the genre deeper into the place that it's arrived at, because simply capturing a good story through traditional direct cinema means is a little less, is seen much more, is seen more frequently on just standardized television. So it required filmmakers, I think, to go a little further. And there's still places for amazing verite filmmaking. There was a movie last year in America called The Overnighters, which to me is one of the greatest documentary films in recent time, with no effects, just a man and his camera. But I think that films like Man on a Wire, Waltz with Bashir, Montage of Heck, these sort of movies have really captured the public's imagination in terms of what a documentary can be. And it's just a very exciting time to be working in this medium.